All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS office hours. It is Thursday, November 3rd. Got NFL Showdown, got a 2-game NBA slate, and got a 13-game NHL slate. A ton of DFS action coming at you guys tonight. If you have any questions about any of the sports slates coming up, get those in the YouTube chat now. Get those in the Office Hours channel in Discord. If you're not a member of our Discord, there's a link in the description below to get joined up to our server. Really excited for today's show. If you are new here, welcome. This is a show where we go over how to use the SaberSim app, answer any and all questions, and just talk DFS strategy overall. So that being said, going to get it kicked off today with a question that came in via support today. This one kind of had me stumped a little bit, had to bounce some ideas off of my fellow team members over here at SaberSim. But with that being said, everybody, apologize for the delay getting started. Was having some technical issues. We should be good now. And I'm going to get SaberSim pulled up here, and I am going to get the show going. There's some background noise. I apologize. It should be gone very, very shortly. All right. Question says, I need your brain. If I'm playing 20 total entries across contests that are less than 100 people, GPPs, I'm building cash lineups. My lineups aren't getting duplicated. Whether the cash lineups are correlated or not, this is the most plus EV strategy, is it not? Since I'm not getting duplicated, playing the best lineups projection-wise, variance should fall my way right over time. If some contests and no duplicates, or is variance that high that it's not the best way? Sorry for bothering, and thank you. Okay, really interesting question here. So what I will say is that I'm going to, you mentioned duplication a lot in this question. So I'm not sure if this is a showdown specific question or a classic slate because it wasn't called out. But what I will say is that the smaller and smaller the number of raw entries in a contest, the less and less duplication matters. It's kind of like a scale. You scale down entries. You should worry about duplication less just because there's less overall lineups that can duplicate you. And as you scale the entries up, there are more and more lineups that can duplicate you. So that's what I want to say first and foremost about duplication. I'd say, if you're playing contests with 100 people or less, you shouldn't be optimizing as much to avoid duplication. You don't need to set a bunch of rules for geo mean and product ownership. Probably don't need to get as crazy with like forcing low owned players into those lineups, just in general baseline there. So that's my first point on just duplication and contest size. Second thing is, if you're only playing contests that are 100 people or less, frankly, that doesn't really follow like our contest selection strategy, which we preach on this show all the time. So if you're not familiar with it, I just, for everyone listening, I just really want to point you to the DFS profit plan. We spent a lot of time and resources invested into creating this DFS profit plan. And we really stand behind it and think that it is a good way to approach DFS from a contest selection strategy point of view. I know it's something that I use. I know it's something that Jordan uses, other team members use, because, we spent the resources and spent the time to come up with something that we truly believed in. And I think that following the DFS profit plan is the best long-term strategy. It's kind of, something you mentioned. You said playing the best lines, variance should fall my way right over time. I think over time, following the DFS profit plan and splitting your contest into diversifiers and elevators is ultimately the best approach. It sounds like you don't have that many diversifier type contests in your portfolio. I would definitely try and add some, whether it's the dime time, whether it's the quarter jukebox, whether it's the $1.20 max, the $3.20 max. I would try and work some of those diversifier type contests into your portfolio. I missed the mini max, another great one. So the diversifiers make up 50 to 75% of your contest selection in the DFS profit plan. So it seems like you're missing a big chunk of really good contests to kind of maximize long-term EV and sustain your bankroll. Lastly, the last point I want to make here is that you say you're building GPPs, but you're playing GPP contests, but because of the size, you're treating them as a cash contest. I think that as the number of entries come down, you probably need to worry about things like correlation and ownership fade less, which the sliders will take that into account. And we can see that if we go into a contest, we click, we're playing like a 3 max, 1 in 10,000. You'll see what the sliders are at like 315. And then let's say we're playing like a single entry, 11 to 100, we're going to value correlation less, but still take it into account. We're not going to worry about ownership fade because we are really not concerned with duplication kind of at this point, and we want to get more of the best plays into our lineup. But we are still taking into account sim diversity and correlation, even though the levels are low. Having these aspects of your lineup be taken into account when SaberSim is randomly sampling the pool and building your lineups is still positive EV. And I would encourage you to, instead of using 000 sliders, to allow correlation and sim diversity into your builds, even at these low levels, because we're basically, the builder's basically saying like, you don't need a lot of it, but a little bit of it is more positive EV than none of it. So those are my thoughts on the question. Don't want to feel like I am, kind of attacking your process or anything like that. But as far as like my tips and suggestions, those are really the things that I kind of wanted to focus on for the question overall. So let me know if you have any feedback. Get back to us in support, and we can continue to talk about it more. So okay, next question. Gonna jump over here to Discord. Once we're through with all the Discord questions, we will jump over to YouTube chat. So got this question here from Snowman11. Snowman said, I built a lineup with SaberSim. The lineup was 277 points. Played it in DK, got 276.7 points. How do I build to get 350 points? Thanks. Okay, so, it sounds like, Snowman, you only built one lineup. You played it, and that lineup got its, 50th percentile outcome. So this sounds like a basketball score, 277 points on the average. So we're just going to hop over here to basketball. We're going to go back to yesterday's slate. It was a bigger slate, probably what this question was referring to overall, and then we could talk about it from there. Okay, so a little issue going back to yesterday's slate. Just going to run it for today. So, let's just get some lineups up here and kind of see what we are talking about. And we have this awesome new feature called lineup percentiles that I think is a great demo and a great way to apply for this specific case. So what Snowman is saying is like, hey, if I look at my lineups, maybe I only played one lineup tonight. Maybe I just, wanted to throw in one lineup, have a sweat. So the projected score was 252 points. And my lineup got just about 252 points. How do I optimize for a lineup to get a higher score that I could win a GPP with? It's a fair question. So really what happened is that your lineup as a whole had its like 50th percentile outcome. That doesn't mean that every single player scored their 50th percentile. That doesn't mean Jamal Murray got 29 and Klay Thompson got 27. But some scoring combination led to these players getting their 50th percentile lineup outcome. And we just added this awesome new feature yesterday called lineup percentiles. So what I imagine happened is, this lineup came in the 50th. It's 50th percentile. If you want to optimize for higher upside lineups, what I would do is I would use this percentile sorting and crank it up to 99th. So what this is going to happen is that we're going to say, this lineup on average will score about 250.5 points. But if I want to optimize for the times where this lineup as a whole has its top 1% outcome, I could set this to 99th percentile, and this is going to be the 99th percentile score. So this 307.2 is the score that this lineup reaches or exceeds 1% of the time in our sim database. So this is a perfect use case for the percentiles. This is why we wanted to add it, so people could try and optimize for these higher upside outcomes. Your lineups might have more variance in this situation, but it's an option to use. If you're not sure about the percentiles, I would continue to optimize by SaberScore. I would say that the fact that the lineup you played and the score that you got was some combination of variance and luck, that it just so happened to have that outcome. But I think this is an awesome example, and for just kind of showing off the new lineup percentiles that we have. So if you want to try and optimize for those higher upside outcomes, I would try using the percentiles and see how they go. But give that a shot. Let me know if you have any follow-up there. And I am going to move on to this next question here from James C. Fox. So kind of two questions in one. Just going to go one at a time here. Looks like James said, should I re-optimize my NBA lineups before each start? Okay, so this is like a late swap question. James is kind of asking, before every start time, should I run a late swap? And the answer is it depends. So the reason it depends is because of injury news. So, my response to this question would be, well, it depends. Is there any news that needs to be taken into account that would cause you to need to re-optimize? So if we were to go over to our lineup rule, I'm sorry, not lineup rules. If we were to go over to the Basketball Monster injury news dashboard, we could see what the pending news is for tonight. So, two game slate, only 3 players questionable at this point in the day. Let's say that, news for these players comes out well before lock and there is no pending injury news. So, we build our lineups, lock comes, and we're approaching this 5 p.m. start time since I'm on the West Coast, and no news has broken. The lineups that we expected are the same as the lineups that come out. And one way to check that is, like before the game or before the lineups come out, you can come in here and you can kind of just like get a feel for who we're expecting to play. I usually use this minutes and kind of see, who are like the top 5 people with minutes. And that's Jokic, that's Murray, that's Porter Jr., that's Aaron Gordon, and that's KCP. Look like the starting 5 to me from my point of view. Another thing you could do is, you can go and look at who the starters were yesterday. Go to ESPN, go to some other website, see who played the game yesterday. Popcorn Machine's an awesome way to do that as well. So you can, go and check the starters from yesterday. Okay, are the same starters we're expecting today? Let's say, lock comes and Bones Highland is ruled in after lock, and now he's starting in. Him and KCP's minutes get flipped. That would be a situation where I would probably want to run a late swap and take advantage of that minutes boost for Highland and that minute decrease for KCP. I'll probably end up getting to more Highland and less KCP. Might not be a 1-for-1 swap, but there's some edge to be had there. So I would say just kind of keep an eye on those things. An awesome resource for that is the NBA lineup alerts channel in Discord. The news that breaks kind of like this shows up in the dashboard. You can see if players are getting ruled in or out, what starting lineups are. You can see when sims run. And I think that our NBA lineup alert channel is an awesome place to keep your eye on throughout the NBA night. So as far as like late swap, when to and when not to, I think that those are the key things you are looking for. I would say if you don't have to late swap, if you don't see news kind of worth it, I would say at the moment, I would prefer not to do it. That way you can maintain any min uniques that you set in the step 3 process before the build. So those are my thoughts there. Let me know if you have any follow-up. And then going to hit this next question from James. And this question is talking about cash games. So James said, in NFL cash, do you want the highest owned guys like Pollard? Because I pivoted to Swift in cash because Pollard was 90%, and to get more correlation with the Miami Detroit game. Okay, so good question. I don't play too much cash, but I understand like basic cash principles. So let's kind of talk about this. So we're gonna go over to NFL, and we're gonna talk about the main slate a little bit here. So while I get over here, I think that, first and foremost, if you are playing cash, what are the cash sliders, right? The cash sliders are correlation 0, ownership fade 0, and sim diversity is off, which means we are using the average projections for the players to build your lineups. So, you kind of mentioned like, hey, Pollard was 90% owned, so I wanted to pivot off him, and I tried to play Swift so I could get more correlation for the Miami Detroit game. I mean, if you look at the sliders for cash, SaberSim is saying don't worry about correlation and don't worry about ownership fade. Like whether Pollard is 90% owned or 10% owned, it like that's not as important in this scenario. Whether Swift is correlated to the other players in your lineup or not is less important. What you are really trying to optimize for is the 50th percentile outcome of a lineup, of a group of players. So, another great way to use the lineup percentiles that just came out. So, let's build 20 cash lineups and let's see what they're looking like. So, before the lineup percentiles came out, what I would tell people to do is that, if they're playing cash and they come into a build, the lineups are sorted by SaberScore by default. I would say switch it to projected score. Now, what I would probably suggest is use the percentiles and then sort by 50th. And, we're going to see that the same lineup is still number one. But I think, that's really what you're trying to do in cash is come in the top 50% of the standings. So in order to do that, I would probably optimize by 50th percentile. And I think that's like a great approach overall. We have a no QB stack right here because we are just trying to pack in as many projected points as possible. So, I think there's something to be said about Pollard being 90% owned, just because if you swap off of him and he gets there, you're basically dead. Like you're almost dead in that situation. Like 90% of the field has one of the top scoring players, and you need a top 50% outcome to cash. So I think there's something to be said. Like if you stay on Pollard and he fails, only 10% of lineups don't have him. So there's still a very good chance for you to cash, as opposed to the reverse option where you fade Pollard and he gets there, then you're basically dead. So I think there's something to be said there. But our slider is like ownership fade, right? It's not like ownership, gain or take into account. So we're not trying to like fade ownership in cash. So that's why it's neutral. If there was like an inverse ownership, maybe you want it like -1 or -2 to like almost play more of the ownership plays, but like that's a completely separate discussion overall. So getting back to the question, I would try to not take these things too far into account. I think you can take chalk into account a little bit and make sure like you might be getting to some of like the highest owned plays if that is what they're projected like to come in at. But I wouldn't try and optimize for correlation or ownership in cash specifically. So I see James is here, just with a couple of comments here. So James, happy you're able to catch the stream. And if you have any live follow-up, just let me know. But those are my thoughts there. So hope I touched on your question well. All right, we're gonna keep rolling here. Got a question from Larson, and Larson is asking, he said, Andrew, if a player isn't in the original lineup pool for your build, can you still late swap to them, specifically for FanDuel NBA late swap? Okay, good question. Happy to demo this. So Larson, the answer to your question is yes. If somebody is not in the original player pool, you can still late swap to them as long as they are added back into the player pool. So, like, for instance, let's say we have a projection filter, right? And it looks like the filter is set to 13. So we're going to go down here, right? So, like, let's say, we have guy like Aaron Wiggins, right? And, we have a filter. We like our filter. We build lineups. He's not in the player pool. Let's say news breaks and all of a sudden Aaron Wiggins is starting and is expected to get like 30 minutes. His projection is going to come up as Sims run, and he will now be put into your player pool. Even if this is after lock, he is now a viable option for the builder to use at this point. So as long as whenever you go to late swap, whether you unchecked somebody, if you uncheck them, you just have to check them back in, and then they are now an option for the builder. So as long as somebody, meets your min projection requirement, is checked in to, has the check mark over here on the left, and is like in the player pool, when you go to late swap, they can still be put into your lineups. And like, that's kind of the point of late swap, is like, we want to take advantage for situations where, tonight, let's say, Jokic gets ruled out, like everybody else on the team is going to get like a huge boost probably. And we just don't know that until after lock sometimes. So SaberSim will update accordingly, and players that become great values after lock will get pushed into the available player pool pending any rules or filters set, and they will be available for you to use. So good question there. Okay. Got this next question here from GM33. This is a good one here, and this is also one that I had to take back to the team a little bit. So GM33 said, hey, Andrew, I know you went over this yesterday, but can you explain updated projections after a sim and how they impact builds you've already created? Last night, after a sim update, I went to a build but wasn't 100% positive that the new projections were being considered in my most recent lineups in that build. When does it / doesn't it get considered? Okay, so this is building on a topic that we just pushed like a update for. So if you go into like Discord and then you go over to release notes, there was an update sent out, it looks like on Monday, and the last point on it says, as part of this update, your latest lineup set is auto-selected when you switch back to an old build. So what this means is that, let's say I run a build and I'm going to go back to DraftKings just because I already ran one, right? So if I click into this build, and let's say between the last time I left and now Sims have run, which it actually looks like it has. I built lineups at 12:11 p.m. and the Sims were last updated at 12:21 p.m. It is now 12:27 p.m. So from the time I ran this, Sims have run, projections have probably updated, whether it was ownership, whether it was point projections. But if I click into this build, so what should happen is that the latest lineup set should be auto-selected. And it looks like it is. It's still showing the one lineup that I last saw, which was this 307.2 when we were doing this percentile demo, percentile 99. So the lineup didn't change. It didn't pop up in this saved lineup. I'm going to just let the team know that, the lineup file might be getting picked, but it wasn't showing that it was indeed picked. So great opportunity to show off our report a problem link. If you guys see anything with new features that look like bugs, just send in a report and say, save lineup file not chosen. And then this helps us to just identify bugs as we release new features, and the team can change those things for us, even though it was working. So even though Sims ran, this might have changed, but because it's loading the last saved lineups, it's not going to change. So how do you do that, right? The best answer is to make a change and then unmake a change. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say, Paolo Banchero, just for the sake of it, I'm going to set his exposure to 100. I'm going to hit apply, and then I'm going to undo this, and then I'm going to hit apply. So I updated, I made a change. I applied the change because we also have this new auto apply exposures off. So what this does is you can go in here and you can make as many changes as you want. This is basically for speed, because what would happen is somebody would make a change, the lineups would have to resort. It would take a little bit. You would make another change, the lineups would have to resort. Instead of doing that back and forth process, kind of time consuming, the new workflow is make all of the adjustments you want. So like, let's say, I think this is better demoed on 20 lineups. Let's say that, I want to get to one lineup with Shy. I want to get to 3 lineups with Paolo. I want to get to 50% of lineups with Josh Giddey. What I can do is set all of those in here and then hit apply, and then them all apply at once, save some time, and makes the workflow go a little faster. If you don't like that, all you can have to do is just toggle this A on. It'll go green. What that will do is now when I make changes, it will go back to updating as I go. So just a quick note of how the new changes work. Still going pretty fast, but just a couple of options for everybody there. I kind of like doing it with auto apply exposures off, because what I do is put in all the exposure adjustments that matter to me, let those apply to the build all at once, then go down and see, okay, where did all of the exposure adjustments I care about put me in my build without, I haven't even touched my min uniques. So just my own opinions on exposures took me to 396th in the pool. That would probably be a little too low for me. I would say, let me rethink my opinions. Do I really have these strong opinions, and why? 2, if I do have strong opinions, maybe I need to tell the builder in the home screen that maybe I like Shy more than the builder likes him. Maybe I like Josh Giddey more than the builder likes Josh Giddey. And then I would kind of start over. If I were to be able to get my opinions into the builder and still be, closer to the 25th to 50th% of the pool, then I would be okay with my exposure adjustments. Then I would start increasing my min uniques and see where that takes me. So in this scenario, I'd probably only get to like 2, and I would have to determine if I'm okay with that much of that many lineups being like that correlated. And on a 2-game slate, I think it's okay to have less min uniques overall. So just kind of like some workflow changes for you guys. Wanted to kind of demo those things for everybody. But yeah, getting back to the original question. So like basically anything that will deselect the current lineup set, and then if you revert back to it, that will take into account the new projections. So, we go back here. This was the latest lineup set. I'm going to set, Jokic to, I'm going to set Jokic to 0, and then I'm going to apply, and then I'm going to undo his specific change. And not sure where he went. Maybe we have him in 100% of lineups. No. So I set him to 0. Apply. Okay, he's gone. So then now I search for him, and then I reset that max exposure. Now projections will be taken into account if new sims have run. So one more time, just to demo that for everybody. That's how that works now. So good question. And we are going to keep moving here. Okay, got a long one from John, and it looks like there are 3 parts to this question, so we're going to take it slowly. So we're going to get this first part of the question in here. Might need to take a breath at some point. So John said, this is more of a showdown question, but also applies to NFL/NBA main slates. I know that SaberScore is based on aspects of a lineup's upside, ownership, and correlation, as well as looks at which lineups are occurring more often. In a sense, wouldn't this inherently favor higher scoring game outcomes rather than lower ones? Say that if I were to enter a 20 max for tonight's game, is there a good way to incorporate different scoring outcomes of the game into a build? The only way I can think of doing it would be, say, build 15 lineups with the normal scores and then maybe build 5 lineups with a lower score, say Texans 10-7. The only problem here is that I don't think there is a way yet to combine/pick lineups from 2 or more separate builds. Okay, so we're gonna talk about this part first. So let's go over to NFL. And sounds like, this is a showdown question. So John is saying, hey, are all the game outcomes basically taken from where Philly scores about 29 points and where Houston scores about 15? So what I want to say first and foremost is that the numbers you see here for the team totals are the average team score across our entire sim database. We have thousands and thousands of sims, and these are the mean scores for the teams. That does not mean that this is the score every single time the sim is run. The players have a range of outcomes, and the games also have a range of outcomes. So I could tell you that there are definitely, I'm sure there are definitely sims in the database where Houston wins 10-7, and there are probably sims in the database where the score is really high. So you have to think of like the sims on a spectrum, and we remember that like when we build your lineups at 0-0-10 sliders, we are randomly sampling single game sims from the entire pool of our thousands and thousands of sims. So there is no reason that you can't get that there's no reason you would get more higher scoring sims than lower scoring sims, because we frankly don't care. And we are just going in and randomly pulling sims from the database. They could be of any score. So inherently you will get a blend of all of the scores the more and more lineups you run. And it's random, but the bigger like sample, the closer to the theoretical like average it gets, right? That's like flipping a coin. Like you might flip a coin 10 times and you might get heads 7 out of 10 times, but the law of large numbers says, the more times you do something, the closer to the theoretical outcome you get. So that's why, if you increase your pool size from 500 to 1500, you're probably going to make sure that your outcomes that you're getting are indeed getting more from the entire range, as opposed to randomly sampling. Maybe you do randomly sample like the higher scoring games. I'm like, that happens. That's okay. But, I would say if you're concerned about that, the easy answer is to build more lineups, and that's less likely to occur overall. Okay. That's the answer for the first part. Going to hit this second part of the question here. It says, for Showdown NBA last night, this also got me thinking about different game outcomes with lineup percentiles. With a 95th percentile, it's more likely to be that you have a cheaper captain so that you fit in all the expensive players that did well. But as you decrease it, would likely flip, and you would likely find a higher salary captain such that you can capture more of the raw fantasy point upside. And then it looks like this last part goes with this. So John said, but I guess my question comes down to something along the lines of this. is SaberScore enough of a metric for my lineups, or should I also be thinking more probabilistically about trying to include different game outcomes? Okay, so this kind of goes back to like our first point. So John, just to kind of hammer it home, we can run a build here and talk about like lineup percentiles, but I think like what I really want to stress in this situation is that we are not favoring average outcomes. We are not favoring high scoring outcomes or low scoring. We are not giving you just one of each. You are getting a blend of all three across the sim database. And what I will say is, like, just remember that SaberSim is not a traditional optimizer optimizing for projected points. It is not trying to pack in as many projected points as possible. The projection values that you see here are not the projection values that we are using to build your lineups when we are randomly sampling single game simulations. Jalen Hurts is not going to score 40.25 that often. He's going to score, 30s. He's going to score 20s. He's going to have some games where he scores, 45, 50. So, his most likely outcome is in this 20 to 30 range, but it's those really high scoring outcomes that push his mean higher. So, we are going in and we are taking those single game sims and building your lineups based on the optimals in those sims. So, best way to think about it, I think that you should find comfort in knowing that every lineup you get is backed with a game sim, and we are not just solving a knapsack problem of trying to pack as many points into your lineups as possible. I think that the sims do a much better job and are much more likely to happen in a sense because, we are putting a lot of work into the inputs in our sim database. So try and think about it that way. For this last point, let's talk about lineup sorting in this post build phase. So, SaberScore, right? So let's talk about SaberScore for showdowns. What is happening is that, the lineups are not valuing correlation and are not valuing ownership fade. So when SaberScore grades your lineups, SaberScore is not grading for these aspects. What is SaberScore grading for? SaberScore is grading for the upside of the lineups at this point. I don't know exactly how close or what percentile or how the upside is being graded in SaberScore versus these new percentile features. I can say that, the higher sim diversity is, the higher the upside we are grading for, and the lower sim diversity is, the lower percentile upside we are grading for. I would have to ask probably Matt, how exactly that works. But, if you are concerned and you want to optimize for the highest upside outcomes, you can go 99th and then you can start to dial it back here. I think there's something to be said for using like an 85th percentile outcome of a lineup for showdown specifically. The game gets played once, the game is not always going to be like the highest scoring game or the best game. We've seen a lot of very bad primetime games. I think that, if you want to take a shot and say, I want to play a game that I don't think that players are going to do as well as they could, maybe you want to try and use percentile 85th as opposed to 95th, where the lineup gets to this score more often than not. I don't know if one is better than the other for showdown. Frankly, it's so new that I haven't had a lot of time to ask these questions and test these things out for myself. But it's an interesting thought experiment, and if you guys want to, give it a shot and on a subset of lineups, I always talk about this. If you have an idea, if you have this thought, something you want to try, take a subset of your contest portfolio and apply the thought experiment to that. A great example is the dime time. You get 20 lineups, 10 cents a lineup, apply a strategy that you're thinking of that you want to try in real time to that subset where the cost of figuring out if you're right or wrong is small, and you can kind of go from there. And if you like it, you can work it into more of your contest portfolio, or if you don't like it, you can get rid of it. And the cost to figure out if it was good or not was fairly small. So those are my thoughts there. I see John had a follow-up here, said, I forgot that those numbers for the game were the averages of all sims. I guess my thinking is just like, is 1,500 lineups a large enough sample? I think that is a good question in and of itself. It is why we are going to be, releasing the pro plan. The pro plan is going to allow people to build 5,000 lineups and not just 1,500 lineups. It is really close to being released. We just got the lineup percentiles out for everybody on all plans. I can tell you that the pro plan is not far behind from being released. The pro plan will allow you to build 5,000 lineups and will kind of solve the question that you're talking about. Is 1,500 enough? Frankly, I don't know if there's an objective answer. I can tell you that more lineups are better, and especially when we're talking about the law of large numbers like we were just talking about. So really excited for the release of the pro plan. I think that being able to build 5,000 lineups is going to give you a much better look at, optimal plays, at game outcomes for showdown, etc. So, really looking forward to the pro plan. Stay tuned for more news there. Okay, got one more question in Discord, and then we're going to be hopping over to YouTube chat. Steven Wilk had a question, said, do you use percentiles for NBA? And the question is, the answer is yes. I have started to work percentiles into my process for NBA. The old percentile format wasn't as much of a fan of. The lineup percentile sorting format, I am a bigger fan of. I've started to use like 95th. I'm pretty interested in converting to 99th. What I would recommend is that, just kind of understand what the percentiles are. So the percentiles are a lineup sorting method that do not take into correlation and do not take into account ownership fade. I think that they're good, especially on larger slates. On a smaller slate like tonight, I would be more inclined to use SaberScore because it's a 2-game slate. Duplication is probably more important or to factor into your process with there only being 2 games on the slate. SaberScore is going to take into account and grade your lineups based on this 6 ownership fade setting here. So I think that SaberScore is probably a better metric on smaller slates. When you get to like those 11-game slates where you're not as worried about duplication, I think that optimizing for upside has a lot of merit. So just remember that, when we're setting this lineup percentile to 95th before, what would happen is you would take, the 95th percentile of Giddey, parlay that with the 95th percentile of Thompson, et cetera, was really unlikely to happen overall. With lineup percentiles, this is the number of times the lineup as a whole reaches or exceeds this score in the sims, and that is about 5% of the time. So much more likely for a 99th percentile score for a lineup to happen in the way that it is calculated now. So I'm much more inclined to use it on those larger classic slates overall. Okay, a lot of good questions today. I see a lot of questions in the YouTube chat, so we're just going to jump right over. Aaron said, so is it normal to get the same SaberSim #1 ranked lineup when building out of a 150 max and single entry contest? Happened to me multiple times, so I wondered if it's expected. Okay, so I would say that, frankly, I don't think it would happen, but we can give this a shot. And the reason I say that I don't think it would happen is because of the slider settings. So, if we come in here and we do 150 max, max entrance, our sliders are going to be 0, 7, 10. Sim diversity cranked all the way up, ownership cranked up very high. If we were to come in here and look at a single entry, probably 1 to 10,000, ownership fade comes down to moderate, sim diversity comes down 3 ticks. And I think because ownership fade is not being graded as much as it was. Sim diversity is lower. You're probably going to get different lineup ranked number one, but that doesn't mean that your number one ranked single entry lineup isn't somewhere in your 150. I think it's probably likely that it can still get in there, but I think that you're probably less likely to have those same lineups ranked number one across multiple build settings, especially since we are randomly sampling the sim database. And for every time you get a build, you can randomly sample a different subset of sims overall. So it can happen. Definitely. It's probably just more of a coincidence than anything, but I wouldn't think too much of it or be worried about it too much one way or the other. Okay. Got a question here from Aaron. Said, how do you sort your lineups for NBA? So we just kind of talked about that. I think that SaberScore is good for smaller slates and like medium slates. And I think that, there's merit to using the percentiles more for those larger classic slates overall. So just my thoughts there. Open to having my mind changed, open to people having, conversations. Well, what about this scenario? What about that scenario? And, we can talk about it further and see what, I think what members of the team think. And, especially with these new features, guys, there's not a wrong or right answer most of the time. And especially in the early times, there's so many different applications for it, so many different ways to approach a new feature that, if you have opinions that are different than mine specifically, please share them. And I'm always looking to have my own mind changed. I'm very open-minded, especially about DFS theory in general. So that being said, I'm going to keep moving here. Dat Boy Steven asked if I use percentiles for NBA, a lot of percentile questions, and happy to continue to talk about them. So it looks like he's been here for the majority of the stream, probably caught what we were talking about. Okay. Demetrius said, SaberSim is not loading MLB Showdown lineups for DraftKings. How can this be fixed? Okay, let's go over and take a peek at this. So let's see what's going on. Looks like there is a game tonight. Projections are loading. I know we were having some issues with this earlier, Demetrius, and from my understanding, talking internally with the team, it should be fixed now. So if this is something that you were experiencing a couple of hours ago, this should be fixed. So let's see here. I'm going to go to utility, make a couple of changes here. All right, I'm going to check the pool. So it looks like the entire pool is working now. I would say about like 2 hours ago, or not even 2 hours ago, maybe like 5 hours ago, like kind of earlier in the day, we were having some issues with the sims. That is all fixed now. And the lineups that you're seeing are good lineups based on the our game sim. So shouldn't have any issue at the moment. All right, going to keep scrolling here. Joseph asked a question, how big are your typical player pools for NFL main slates? Okay, good question. So let's go and look at what a base player pool looks like for NFL. So if we were to just go to NFL for this upcoming weekend, we have, I don't know how big, let's just run a default build. I think that's the best way to do it. And we can see, how many players are getting into our player pool. I think the first question is, what contests are you playing? What type of build are you doing? Are you doing a diversifier build? Or are you doing an elevator build? And those are terms that we use as part of our DFS profit plan to separate single entry and 3 max into elevators, and then 20 max and 150 max into diversifiers. I would say that, what you're going to see often is that you're going to have more players in your player pool, in your diversifiers, than your elevators. I am particularly not concerned about what this all number comes out to, but I just wanted to point out that if you run a diversifier build for a 150 max, and then you come in here and run a single entry build where sim diversity is now lower overall, and I'm going to make a couple of adjustments here to the projections in the home screen so we can see the lineups. So we had, let's just remember that we had 108 players in our player pool in our large field build, and we're going to run a single entry build for a smaller contest where sim diversity is lower, and we're going to see how many players we are getting into our player pool, mostly just to demonstrate that SaberSim understands that a tighter player pool is warranted in contests that are single entry and 3 max. So if we open this up to, let's say, 20 lineups, we're going to have 42. If we were to go take our pool of with the higher sliders, we're going to have 73. So, okay. So in this build with 448 slider settings, we had 73 players and we were looking at 20 lineups. In this other build with lower slider settings, with 315 slider settings, also looking at 20 lineups, we only have 42 players in our player pool. So just remember, as sim diversity is increased, you're going to have more players in your player pool. As sim diversity is lowered, you're going to have less players in your player pool overall. The number of players I have in my player pool doesn't bother me as much, but one thing that I like to do is I like to do an extra step of player pool curation. Something that Andy has talked about that he does is that he will come in here and add a filter and say, only show players where my ownership is greater than 3. And we went to 408 removed. If I remove this filter, we go back to 334 players removed. So we did an extra step of curation there to get rid of approximately 74 more players from the player pool. And, the basis for doing that is that, we are just trying to trim the player pool down a little more prior to the build to make sure that we are only getting plays that we are comfortable with. I think another way to do this is to sort by projection and kind of come down here and see if there are a group of players that you do not like off of the naked eye. So the projection filter by default is set to 3. So I would just come down here and kind of see who these players are that are right above the 3 threshold and see if you like them or not. You can determine like, hey, I really don't like any of these players below 4. So then you just change this to 4. You're doing a little more player pool curation. I like to use something closer to like the 5 to 6 point range, but it's a personal choice. It's something you kind of have to determine for yourself. I typically will always make sure that defenses are unchecked because defenses just don't grade out that high overall, and it's really hard to project defense points on a week-to-week basis. And so I like to leave all defenses available to be played in a lineup and mostly just manage their exposure in the post-build process. So those are my thoughts on like player pool curation and pool size in general. Okay, got a question here from Robbie Morris. Robbie said, on the same subject, it would be very cool to be able to do multiple builds and be able to handpick certain lineups and add them to a portfolio. So yes, this is a feature request that has come in before. People want to be able to say, give me like the best 5 lineups from this build and then give me the best 5 lineups from that build and let me be allowed to combine them together. It's something that the team is aware of, that, has been requested a couple times, and something that we want to build into the app in the future. It's on the roadmap and it's on the feature request list to get built. So I will add it as another time that this came in. So let me go ahead and just make a quick note for myself. Feature request for combining lineups from multiple builds. Combining lineups, multiple builds, just so I can get that down and make sure that we get there. Get that noted, because the more times it comes in, the more likely we are to build it for you guys. So John said, oh no, we got to John's comment. Marky Mark said, what percentiles do you recommend using? So Marky Mark talked about that a couple times here. I would say, depends on the number of games on the slate, depends on the contest type. I think there's merit for using, 85th, 95th, 99th. I would say experiment with them and see which ones you like. All right. Rydmore says, there a contest portfolio feature on SaberSim? So our contest portfolio, I would say like framework is noted in our DFS profit plan, which if you go to our YouTube channel, you go to home, it says new here, start here first. You're going to see the start winning more with our DFS profit plan. Jordan walks through it in like a PowerPoint kind of format. You can go in here, you can take a screenshot of the framework and kind of just keep it handy on your computer so you can apply it slate to slate. But I would go in and check it out and see what he is talking about in there. But that is our contest portfolio metric at the moment. All right, going to pull SaberSim back up here. And John said, is there a way to build 1,500 lineups, sort by SaberScore, then sort, say, the top 100 of those lineups by 95th percentile? Okay, so no, there is not a way to do that at the moment. So, we just released the percentiles. That is a pretty interesting idea, like sorting within sorting. I will note that down as another feature request here. So sort based on 2 metrics and make a note of that. But sounds like a pretty interesting idea overall. So I'll make a note, and we'll see if we can get that worked into the app in the near future. All right. Question here from RF. Can you enter your gut picks into SaberSim and have the algo give total DFS fantasy football points according to SaberSim? I am brand new learning the system. Okay. So if you are building for this weekend, and let's say that, you give your gut picks. So you can do this a couple of different ways. If you want to tell SaberSim that, hey, I want to use these players no matter what I would do is I would set a group rule. So go to our lineup rules dashboard, go to groups, go to manual. If you have like 2 players you want, maybe it's Josh Allen and Tyreek Hill for whatever reason, I would put them in a group and then say use at least 2. So that way, Josh Allen and Tyreek Hill are going to be in every single lineup you build. If you have very strong convictions, I would tell SaberSim those up front. That way, the lineups that you get in the post-build process is closer to what you are looking for. If you do not want to be this blunt with your methodology, what I would suggest is to increase a player's projection closer to their 75th percentile. So, you want to say, hey, I want to value a player more than what their average projection is valuing them at. What I would do is I would move their projection closer to their 75th percentile and see the builder outputs that are coming up. Your gut or research you've done is telling you that, so-and-so is going to have a better than average game is basically what you're saying. So you want to optimize for that. I would come in here and adjust their projection to a higher number, probably like 75th is a good starting point. So those are 2 things that I would use to try and get to that point. All right. See a question here from William Larson said, I run 174 lineups a night. 150 go into a contest that has 215,000 entrants. The other 24 lineups are all under 50K entrants. Am I right to still be using default sliders of greater than 50K? So, William, it sounds like the one thing that I am missing from this is that what are the entry limits for those other contests? If it is a 20 max for these other 24 lineups of the 174, I think it's totally okay to continue to build them together, especially when the entrants are still really high. I think that building lineups based on, your contest dynamics for the contest with the most number of lineups is okay. So, I think what this is like referring to is probably FanDuel. If you're playing the pooch punt and, that lineup has, 200K plus entrants and is a 150 max. And then you're also playing like the quarter 20 on FanDuel. I think it's totally okay to just build lineups based on the 150 because that's where the majority of your lineups are going into, and then just lumping together your 20 max with that build that is in line with our contest selection framework of building your diversifiers together overall. I think it's totally okay. All right, this is our last question, everybody. And actually, we have 2 more questions, one from Jack, one from Greg. Going to get to both of these. If you guys have any more questions you want to cover today, get them in the chat now. We're going to keep moving. See a follow-up here from William, said it's 20 max, then 3 max, and single entry. I feel unique random. So I would say, William, it's always okay to build your lineups together. I would say, if you have the time, I would build a 20 max and the 150 as one build and the single entry and the 3 max as a separate build, time permitting in your personal life, in lock, in news, all of those things. I think, it's never, if you don't have the time, it's totally okay to build them all together if you want to save time. So, but best practice is to split up the 2 into one build, the 20 max and the 150, and then the single entry and the 3 max into another build. That is definitely best practice in line with our DFS profit plan. Okay, got a question here from Jack Ryan, said, is there a way to step back whatever changes I've made without resetting everything I've changed? So yes. So if you are in a build and let's say, you are making changes and it looks like, we got this announcement here at the bottom of the screen. If I were to take this off, it says SaberSim is currently undergoing maintenance to the app. You may see some brief interruptions in your service. Not sure exactly what's going on. Not sure if that is going to affect the stream in any way, but we're going to continue to try and demo these questions. So going back to Jack's question here, said, is there a way to revert changes without reverting everything? So he's basically saying, if I'm making changes, right, and I'm saying, I want like 0% of this guy and 0% of this guy, and I get to a point where SaberSim says, I can no longer meet your requested exposures. How do I do that? If I get this message, unable to meet exposures, and I don't want to undo all of my work, I just want to undo some of it. So if you hit this red reset icon, it is going to wipe all of your exposures that you set. You'll have to start from 0. What I would recommend doing is, just for an individual player, just go to the player and you could hit the reset icon for that specific player. Maybe you want to do it for a couple players and see how that affects your exposures if the builder is now able to build lineups. So I reset like 4 things and that allowed the lineups to be generated. So just go into an individual player. Also works for stack types, etc. If you undid some stack types and then you hit apply and then it wasn't working, instead of hitting the red reset, you could just go to the stack types that you zeroed out and just reset that individual stack type. So it works for stack types, game stacks, team stacks, individual players, all work the same there. Okay. Greg said, how can I see my saved lineup rules? Okay, if you want to see your saved lineup rules, you can see that in the home screen. So if you go to this lineup rules dashboard over here on the right, and we're going to add a rule saying, use no more than 4 players from the same team. And I'm going to hit save. Okay, it should be showing up. This might be why the SaberSim app is undergoing maintenance. But basically, when you save a rule, it will save over here. And also, as a side note, any rules that you save are going to be carried over to next week's slate. That way you don't have to redo the same rules over and over. If you know that you never want more than 4 players in a lineup on any given week, that rule is going to be transferred to the next slate for your ease of use, so you do not need to continue to set it. The only thing that will happen is that the rule will be turned off by default. So all you have to do is open up your lineup rules, come in and hit the check mark to activate the rule. So that's how you do that. All right. John said, I try to build for each contest type when I have time. I mean, that's definitely like the most EV thing you could do if you have the time. I don't think you're sacrificing that much EV by splitting up into diversifiers and elevators. And conversely, if you don't have the time, it's better to just build all together. So John said, great stream today. Really excited for this new pro plan. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Got one more question here from Luke. Luke said, can I upload projected minutes to SaberSim for NBA? Okay, good question. So let's go over to NBA. And to answer your question, I do not think so. So the only things that you can update, that you can upload, are these editable fields. So, projections, I can go in here and I can edit. Ownership, I can go in here and I can edit. Exposure, I can go in here and I can edit. If the column is non-editable, then you cannot upload for that thing. So these minutes that you see are our minutes from the Sims. So, it's the average minutes that the player played across our entire Sim database. So if you wanted to incorporate your own minutes into the builder, what I would do is I would probably try and do a fantasy point per minute calculation. And maybe you're using our projections, but you want to use your own minutes. So I would, export this as a CSV and add a column and then do a calculation, projection divided by minutes, and figure out, how many points per minute we are giving to a certain player. And then add another column, add your own minutes, and then just multiply the fantasy points per minute by your minutes that you want to use, and then convert that to a custom projection, and then upload your new custom projection. So probably takes a little manual work in the CSVs, but if you wanted to do it, convert projection to fantasy points per minute and then multiply fantasy points per minute by your minutes that you want to use is how you would do that, Luke. So that being said, everybody, that was our last question. Had a good stream today. A lot of live questions. Happy to hear it. It looks like there was a question I had from yesterday that I wanted to get to. Somebody asked about bullpen usage metrics in MLB. And I just wanted to bring up this website really quickly. So it is baseballpress.com/bullpen usage. If you want to get like a quick look at who has pitched lately, who is likely to pitch upcoming, this website is a good resource to see what the relief pitcher dynamics look like. I think it's a way to try and incorporate who is likely to pitch into your process. SaberSim does not know who pitched yesterday when building lineups for today. It's a spot where you can add value if you are playing MLB Showdown. So I think this is a good tool to kind of see who is more likely to pitch. You can give those players a point projection bump. If you hear word that, a player is more likely not to pitch, you can go in and remove those players from your player pool. Something I needed to touch on from yesterday. And lastly, the last announcement I have is that this show is going to be at 2 p.m. Eastern starting next Monday, 11/7, November 7th. We made a time change this week from the previous show time. And, we're just kind of coming full circle, going back to the old office hours time. It was the best time overall. We've tried a couple different time slots, and the 2 p.m. Eastern window ends up being the best one. So starting Monday, November 7th, this show will be at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're going to finish out this week with the 3 p.m. Eastern shows and start fresh on Monday. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. I will post an update in the Discord on Friday. So that being said, I will see you all tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern. Good luck in your contest tonight and take care.